Hello, everyone. Greetings and welcome to this event for the 40 Days of Engagement on Anti-Racism. My name is Adele Halliday, and I serve as the Anti-Racism and Equity Lead at the National Office of the United Church of Canada. And as part of my role, I coordinate the 40 Days of Engagement on Anti-Racism. This webinar is one in a series, which is part of the United Church's continued journey towards becoming an anti-racist church. And it's one of a series of webinars, and each is meant to be a time of learning, reflection, and action. Today's live event is now focused on an Indigenous-led framework for reparations and healing. And it features two staff from the Indigenous Ministries and Justice Unit, Joni, Shawana, and Sara Stratton. And we will be able to hear from them shortly. This gathering time will feature a key update about the most recent national gathering from the Office of the Independent Interlocutor for Missing Children and Unmarked Graves and Burial Sites, which has led out an Indigenous-led framework for reparations. And we will also have an update on the United Church's work on bringing the children home, as well as conversation about the various funds available through healing programs, how to access grants and bursaries, and how gifts from the National United Church Women support the Healing Fund. So all of that is coming shortly. This week, the particular focus is around Indigenous justice, and there are a number of written reflections, one by Lori Ransom and one by Susie McPherson-Durende, which are available on the website. There are also some featured books, so we'll talk about the books shortly. There are a number of books that are available throughout the whole series of the 40 Days of Engagement on Anti-Racism, and here is the full collection of books here. This week in particular, we are lifting up two books. One is North of Nowhere, which is written by Marie Wilson, one of the commissioners for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. It feels fitting to be lifting up this book this week. Particularly, many of us have been deeply saddened by the passing of Marie St. Clair, who was the chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So Marie Wilson's book is one that we can pick up this week and remember. Another book that we are featuring this week is Motorcycles in Sweetgrass. These books and more are all available from the United Church Bookstore. And if you were to order 2 or more books and use the discount code 40 days, you would be eligible for a discount of up to 15%. A few more things about today as we gather. There is a newsletter that is available for the 40 Days of Engagement on Anti-Racism. Each week, there are a number of updates that are available. You're welcome to sign up if you would like to keep up to date about this, but as well as general work around anti-racism. As well for today, the chat is closed for today, but if you do have some questions, please feel free to email anti-racism@united-church.ca. You're welcome to email questions at any time, and we will feed those to the 2 presenters who will be speaking today. So please feel free to email questions, and those will get relayed to the presenters. Before we move to hear from Sara and Joni, let us pause for a moment of prayer. This is a prayer for those struggling with justice. It is written by Mitchell Anderson, who is ministry personnel based in Saskatoon, and who is Dene Sutile. So let us pray together. You're welcome to join with the words that are on your screen. God, you listen to your people when we are in need. Receive us when we are tired and grant us rest. Accept us when times are harsh, as you accepted Hagar. Rescue us as you did your people from Egypt. Help us by your great power to continue in our struggles for justice, the same power that raised Jesus from death at work in our bodies, raising us out from frustration and weariness to proclaim your name and to live your justice. Be with us in our refusals to be worn out, in acts of joyful resistance, in everyday commitments to our own well-being and the good of our communities. Help us to experience the fullness of life and to share that life with all in the world. Through Jesus Christ, who endured struggle and pain to make us and the whole world, the world whole, and who rises to new life, and who will raise us all to the new creation. Amen. So we give thanks for those prayerful words from Michelle Anderson. So with that, we move into our conversation about an Indigenous-led framework for reparations and healing. And first, we invite Joni to share her words of wisdom with us. So thank you, and over to you, Joni.
Hello, good evening. Ani Bojo. Joni Dishnakaz Wikwamikong Don Chaba. My name is Joni. I said Joni Dishnakaz. That's in Anishinaabe. Saying my name is Joni. Wikwemikong Don Chaba means I am from Wikwemikong. It's located on the east side of Manitoulin Island, and that is my home and where I currently reside. Thank you for inviting me this evening, and I'm here to share with you uh, some some of the programs and um, how the process of the Healing Fund works. Um, and also talk about the a little bit about the partnership and the gifts that's received through the UCW. So, a little background on the Healing Fund. It was established in 1994, and it's a grant that supports healing initiatives to Indigenous communities to address the ongoing impacts of residential school system. Many of the communities named the need for mending, restoring, and celebrating the sense of loss the sense of loss, and along with hope and rebuilding identity. The healing program consists of volunteers from diverse communities across the country who determines the funding criteria and evaluates all the applications. Support for the Healing Fund is a movement towards living out the United Church's apology to Indigenous peoples, which was in 1986, and the apology of former students of United Church Indian residential schools and their families and communities in 1998. The Healing Fund is made possible by gifts to missions and service with United Church. So some of the projects that have been funded, communities have access to the Healing Fund through our website. We'll share the link and information later on. Um, but communities have access to up to $15,000 to implement and bring um, healing projects that would restore, mend, and bring back language, culture, um, any kind of memorial commemorations to residential school survivors. Um, so some of these projects will look like as like healing circles, sharing circles, where you bring in elders to share their stories and experiences. Sometimes they could be really heavy, but they like to, um, most of the communities um, incorporate other programs along with these sharing circles. So they could be learning how to cook in a kitchen, doing some crafts, doing some traditional crafts, or being out on the land, or even through ceremony. So it's not just the sitting around and talking and sharing those, because those could be really heavy. So when you incorporate different cultural activities and language learning, and you bring in families and you bring in the youth, there's that intergenerational bridging and sharing stories with each other. And that too, in sharing food, all of that together helps with healing. Because you can't just keep everything bottled up. You have to be able to share your story. A lot of the projects, we encourage our applicants to have trauma-informed practices in place to support those that may need additional supports if anything was triggering through any programs. So those are the healing circles and sharing circles. There's residential school reunions, where they could come together and have their own healing circles together. There's workshops, trainings for elders, resource people, counselors for counselors and parents, to talk about ways they could heal together as a community, as a school environment. There's a lot of language and cultural recovery programs, communities that's wanting to do these programs. In the last round, which was just this fall, um, I would have to say at least 70% of our applicants that were approved were language initiatives. So a lot of the other programs that involve culture are beading, learning how to harvest and hunt and pick berries, understanding those cycles of life as well, of animals and the plants, and having that connection, what we call our first family. Our first family is Mother Earth, because that's where we come from. Our spirit comes from Mother Earth. So that's that connection of being out on the land. So being out on the land is healing in itself. Traditional cultural events. There's been powwows, sun dances, rain dances, um, different sacred fires that would have these commemorations and honoring residential school survivors. Um, so the events could vary from something that's very artsy, involving dancing and singing, to something that's very spiritual. There's a lot of other events that involve the bridging between the church and cultural events as well. Um, Really, really high emphasis on um, youth programmings and children. And I'll talk about a little bit of the children and family programs with the UCW stuff as well. But there's if there's a lot of youth-led programs, because it's very important to involve our youth, and it's very important for the youth to know their history of their grandparents or their great grandparents, or even their parents of where they come from in terms of their story. There's also been projects of collecting and publishing stories, books, newsletters, um, around people's stories of residential school or even language. One of the projects that was supported a couple of years ago was a young Indigenous youth. She was Afro-Indigenous, or she is Afro-Indigenous, and Cree. So her Indigenous side was Cree from Saskatchewan, and she created a children's book that talks about dad's experience at residential school and the things that he was teaching his daughter. Um, I could, if anybody's interested in that and what that book is, I could reference that later on as well. Um, but that book was published, um, and that was fully funded by the Healing Fund. So she was able to um, get assistance and support for a translator. She was also able to support the artist who drew the graphics for her book. And there's also healing for young people and two-spirit people, like I said, the youth. So as I mentioned in the beginning, gifts through missions and service is where where if you're interested in gifting to the Healing Fund, that's where it goes, is through mission and service. Um, through the so Sorry, I'm a little stumbled. Um, I've started with the Healing Fund in 2022, so I don't have the full scope and history of how much projects have been funded since the Healing Fund started it. Um, but the information sheet that I do have, it goes back to 2012, and I could say that since then, there's been about 300 projects that's been supported by the generous gifts made to the Healing Fund through mission and service. So that was since 2012, and if the Healing Fund started in 1994, um, there's well over 300 projects that have been supporting Indigenous peoples and communities in healing from the impacts of residential school. For 2023, There were 22 initiatives that were funded. And this year in 2024, we were able to support 24 Healing Fund initiatives. Some of the projects that have been supported by the Healing Fund, the Saugeen Wesley United Church has the Ojibwe and Win Kinomage Win through immersion. So that is an Ojibwe, an Kinomage is like teaching. So it's an Ojibwe language course that was fully immersed. And when you attend the program, it was intergenerational. So they had a lot of young people and young families coming there to sit with their language speakers from their community. They learned language through games and they learned language through food. And that was a program that went on for approximately 6 months. The Minogan Gitaga Society, which is in London, Ontario, had the Orange Flower Memorial Project. So what they did is they built a memorial garden filled with orange flowers, and that was to um, honor those those that didn't make it home and the survivors that are here with us today. The Regina Native Outreach Ministry, which was a project that was supported by the UCW, and I'll still explain how the UCW stuff works in a little bit. The Regina Native Outreach Ministry had the mother and baby welcome bags. So through that, they were able to do 4 distributions of baby bags for boys, girls, and like in a unisex bag. And they had information for ministry support, traditional support. The bags came with any of the basic needs that mom needs for the first couple of days and weeks for baby. Just to kind of help her and help them for their first couple of days at home. Included feedings, included clothes, a blanket. And one of the really cool things that I liked about the a connection that was made was a UCW group in the East Coast um, wanted to contribute to the baby welcome bags. And the church in the East Coast, they had a knitting or some kind of quilting program where they made shawls, but they also could have been used as blankets. So what they end up doing was they end up shipping those shawls to be used as baby blankets to be added to those welcome bags. So it was really nice to see a UCW from the East Coast be able to connect and support the Regina Native Outreach Ministries in the mother and baby welcome bags. Another program that was supported was the Giga Doat no Kamisak. Um, Sorry, I don't know how to totally speak it, but a lot of our programs are within the language. Ina Kona Gowin, which means doing something in a good way. So this program is here in Northern Ontario. It's a grandmother's group out of Ganabajing, which is a Serpent River First Nation, which is between Espanola and Sault Ste. Marie. And because there's a couple of communities within the North Shore, um, and they're smaller communities. The closest cities would either be Sault Ste. Marie or Sudbury, and a lot of the people from Ganabajing would they tend to go to the cities for more support, either for education or jobs and things like that. But they tend to find themselves getting lost in terms of getting the proper supports and services that are needed, and it results in a lot of our people having struggles. Either with housing, food security, or even becoming houseless. So the grandmothers group in Ganabajing, they go out there and provide food to the indigenous homeless population. One of their events, they had over 160 people coming out, where they were able to provide hot soups and suppers, and um, give out some warm clothing and offer a fire for a weekend. Um, the last one other project is which I think this one is really unique as well, is the Horse Spirit Healing and Wellness. They were able to provide mental health first aid training and other aftercare workshops for elders in Saskatchewan. So one of their main goals is things they identified was that grandparents are raising their grandchildren, but they don't have the knowledge on how to better support their grandchildren, whether if it's through like the supporting with mental health or even the basic first aid. So this program, they bring in professionals to train the grandparents on some of the stuff that would help them with their grandchildren. And through that as well, it gives them the opportunity to share their stories and experiences as well, and how to support each other as grandparents, but also in raising their grandchildren, their grandchildrens together. So I felt that was a very interesting program that was funded earlier this year. Um, in terms of the UCW, Um, so the National UCW, which is the United Church, what is it again? Sorry, United Church Women group. Every 5 years, they select a project and they gift to that project for 5 years. And in 2023, they have no 2022, late 2022, they chosen the Healing Fund as their 5-year focus. So UCWs across the country um, gift their gifts to the Healing Fund, and their main objective is supporting women and their families. So how that works is the Healing Fund itself, we have 150,000 to gift to Healing Fund initiatives, and with the gifts from UCW, we add to that. So whatever gifts that come in throughout the year, it'll allow us to fund one extra project in the springtime that focus on women and families. And because there's a lot of single dads as well that need the support. So as long as if there's a program that is focused on single dads as well, as long as the program is supporting the children, we're able to select if the committee itself, the working group could select that program as well, because the need is with the children. Um, so this year, oh no, sorry, last year, as I mentioned, they supported the um, Regina Native Outreach Ministries with the baby bag, um, mom and baby bag program. This year, for 2024, the working group has selected cooking in the or healing in the kitchen up in northern, I forget where they're at, BC or Northwest Territories. Sorry, Fort McKay First Nation, Métis Nation. I believe it's Northern Alberta. So they have a healing in the kitchen that's bringing together families to connect with the elders and learning how to cook traditional foods, and as well as integrating language into their program too. So healing in the kitchen is running for, they were we supported them in the springtime, so it'll be running for the year. Um, and then in spring 2025, the working group will select a new project to focus on for the National UCW. So members from the National UCW, they're encouraged to give to the Healing Fund, and gifts could be sent to through missions and service, and then you just got to do the healing fund. There's a little code that you can email the healing fund for the code on how to direct your gifts specifically for a UCW focused project, or you could just memo line the healing fund, and that'll go to the general pot for healing fund initiatives. Yeah. So if you're interested in the healing fund, sorry, I'm losing my windows here. If you're interested in connecting with the Healing Fund, you could email myself at healing@unitedchurch.ca. Also, gifts could be sent through by visiting a link that I'll post here momentarily. And I'll also post the webpage for on where to get information for the Healing Fund. So you're welcome to, if you have any questions in regards to the Healing Fund, processes, procedures, applications, criteria, I'd be more than willing to connect with you and share the information with you. If you're also interested into learning more about the National UCW projects that support it, I'll be willing to share that information with you as well. Um, but yeah, thank you. And I hope you enjoyed my presentation.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sara Stratton, and I work in the Indigenous Ministries and Justice Unit as Reconciliation and Indigenous Justice Animator. This is my cat, Steve, who always likes to join me. I thought he wouldn't do that tonight, but I was wrong. Just give everybody just a couple of seconds to maybe just absorb what Joni has shared with us. It's such a huge, excuse me a second. It's such a huge range of Indigenous-led work in response to the call for reconciliation and healing. And that fund, I don't know if Joni mentioned it, I think the United Church Fund has been going since 1994. So just amplify all of those amazing examples that she gave you. And think about the type of work that has been done for 30 years now in the church. So thanks to Joni for sharing that. I want to just give you a few minutes to let that settle. I am going to talk about the reparations framework in a minute. This, of course, relates to unmarked burial sites. And but before I did that, I thought I would just give you a little update on our own initiative about that. When the truth of unmarked graves was revealed and accepted in the summer of 2021, we spent some time in the Indigenous Ministries and Justice Unit figuring out what would be the appropriate way to respond. And the appropriate way we were led to understand was not to rush in, but to listen to community and see what community wanted, to take time to pray and reflect. And so we did that, but then we did come up with an initiative called Bringing the Children Home, which is it's a responsive program. It's not a program that we go out and talk about a lot, but we contacted the communities who were the closest or who were the caretaker communities for residential institutions operated by the United Church and began a series of conversations. The moderator, past moderator, current moderator, and the general secretary have been in conversation with about 8 communities so far. We have funded 4 community-led projects to commemorate the children who were lost from those communities. We're in discussion with 2 more. We've also undertaken a huge archival project to digitize new materials that were not identified by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, including records from hospitals or missions or communities of faith. And we are actively sharing that with communities who want them. And that has been probably the most important part of the Bringing the Children Home program. We have shared those documents now with 24 communities, and that represents about 75,000 pages of material, thousands of images, and more coming on all the time. So that's just, we have had questions recently about what's going on with the bringing the children home. That's just a little sketch of it for you, so you have some idea of what's happening in there. But what I wanted to talk to you about tonight is an experience I had at the end of last month, which was to attend the final national gathering of the Special Interlocutor for Missing and Disappeared Children and Unmarked Burials, and to receive her final report. So Kimberly Murray was appointed to this position in June of 2022. And she and her staff have functioned independently and impartially since, in a nonpartisan and transparent manner. They've been in discussion with government, with churches, with First Nations groups, governance groups and cultural groups, and with the churches. And her mandate was to identify the needed measures and to make recommendations for a new federal legal system that would deal with unmarked graves and burial sites of children at former Indian residential schools in a respectful and culturally appropriate way. So that has been what her work has been for the last 2.5 years. I think I mentioned there were 7 of those gatherings, and the United Church was present at all of them except one. That work has now concluded, and the Special Interlocutor has released her final report, which is called an Indigenous-Led Framework for Reparations. And that was on October 29th in Quebec. Notably, as you can see in the title slide here, she is now referred to as the Special Interlocutor on Missing and Disappeared Children and Burial Sites. Disappeared was not originally in her title. That's a really significant change, as we're going to discuss later in the presentation. And we'll just move to the next slide. But before we go any further, I want to offer a few thoughts on the idea of reparations. The American ethicist Margaret Urban Walker defines what can be a very complex concept as amends owed for wrongs and wrongful harms. And when we talk about reparations in the Christian context, we often turn to the Old Testament vision of Jubilee outlined in the books of Leviticus and Deuteronomy. In both of those texts, reparation is made for gaining wealth at the expense of others, either through enslavement or the displacement from one's land. In the New Testament, we see it reflected in stories like the story of Zacchaeus. That's often cited as a story of reparative justice. The dishonest tax collector pledges to share his wealth back with the people whom he has defrauded. Now, we all know there's no real evidence that a Jubilee ever existed, and that's often used to kind of discredit the idea. But even if there never was a Jubilee, I think what's interesting is that the original texts and the repetitions of those principles in the Gospels tell us that it was a really powerful and liberating force within Judeo-Christian thought and teaching. And so it's an important concept in our story. And we have historical examples of reparations. Reparations were paid to formerly enslaved people by Quakers in the 17th century. During the American Civil War, some slave holders were paid what I would call a perverse form of reparation when they freed the enslaved. In our own or our parents' lifetimes, Germany paid reparations for the Holocaust. So did Canada and the United States for World War II internment of Japanese people of Japanese descent. And with the exception of reparations for slaveholders, I'm not passing any judgment on the quality of those reparations. That judgment belongs to the people who received the reparation. And so it's appropriate, I think, that as the United Church of Canada, which has committed wrongs and wrongful harms against Indigenous peoples, it's appropriate that we pay attention to what the special interlocutor is putting forward as an Indigenous framework for reparation. And we can move on to the next slide. This is a picture from the gathering. It was rooted in the voices and experience of survivors. It was a place of reflection. It was a place of trauma, community, humor, cultural expression, healing, and looking towards the future. As a non-Indigenous representative of one of the churches, it was an honor for me to be present and to be welcomed there. And I want to take time now to acknowledge that this presentation contains material that will be traumatic for Indigenous people. And if that is you, please do what you need to do to take care of yourself, whether that's step away, whatever it is. I also want to acknowledge that there's a lot of technical and legal language in this presentation, but to ask you to remember that behind all of that, there are real children, real families, and real communities who have suffered at the hands of the state and the churches. So we can move on. These sentences are from the introduction to the report. The special interlocutor is very clear that she does not make recommendations. She is naming what she calls the legal, moral, and ethical obligations of the churches, government, and other institutions. Legal, moral, and ethical obligations. And the framework is built on human rights instruments, Indigenous law, international human rights and criminal law, and Canadian constitutional law. I can see some people making notes. If you're interested, we can make a PDF of this available to you so you don't have to scramble to get everyone get their notes down. You can just listen. Next slide, please. There was another key part of the report and the context in which it was created, and that is the obligation to survivors. The special interlocutor is very, very clear on the obligation we owe them. And also clearly running through the report is the fact that the residential school system was unequivocally genocidal. These are accepted as facts in the report. Next slide. It's a big report. It covers many issues in addition to those that I'm going to talk about tonight. Those include continuing to provide space and funding for elders to gather and speak, resilience-based healing and healthcare, so things like some of the stuff Joni was talking about, rematriation of burial land, and repatriation of the children themselves. Next slide. I'm going to focus on these 5 focal points. These are findings and obligations of importance to the United Church because they redefine the nature and impact of residential and other colonial institutions. They name how Canada as a state continues to deny its role. They name a possible way forward. They address Canadian society's denialism of its role. And they also name specific actions the church must undertake as part of their own obligations. So we'll go to the next slide. The first we'll talk about is enforced disappearances. And we can move forward once more. So probably the biggest finding of this report is that many children who did not return home must be considered to have been intentionally disappeared. They're not missing, they were intentionally disappeared. We know from the findings of both the TRC and the special interlocutor that it was anticipated by the government and churches that children would die. They designed residential institutions with cemeteries attached. Little was done to prevent or mitigate that children were shuttled between institutions, and that they were dehumanized after death. These are all practices that are associated with the international understanding of enforced disappearance. And as those of you with any experience in international human rights work know, to be disappeared is a very specific and serious form of a human rights violation. So we'll go to the next slide. as I said, it's different to being characterized as missing and holds a distinct place in law. Enforced disappearance involves deprivation of liberty by the state and the concealment or refusal to acknowledge what happened to the person. The harm extends beyond the person to their family and community and is considered in law to be ongoing. And enforced disappearance is a crime against humanity or a damage to all of us if it is part of a widespread or systemic attack on any civilian population. And these characters all apply to what happened in residential institutions. Next slide. So the report, again, it was about obligations. The report names 2 obligations to deal with this. The first is to pay full reparations to living descendants for disappeared children. So that's a part of where it's an ongoing harm, right? And it says that government must publicly acknowledge that it conducted enforced disappearances. So these are 2 ethical and legal obligations. And they are obligations that the United Church could choose to support through education and advocacy as a natural follow-up to the work that we have done on reconciliation. Now we're going to move to the next slide, where we're going to talk about settler amnesty and the culture of impunity. Move straight along. So connected to Canada having a policy of disappearing children is Canada also having a culture of impunity, or what the special interlocutor calls a settler amnesty. She says settler amnesty is an ongoing and unconditional refusal to prosecute those who are most responsible for the harm. Impunity is the freedom from facing any punishment, and a culture of impunity permits individuals and institutions to keep on doing harm, knowing that they will not be held accountable. So at the time it ran residential institutions all the way through to the present, even with the context of the TRC, she argues that Canada has fostered a culture of impunity and a settler amnesty. We could go to the next slide. How have they done it? The historian Sean Carlton says that Canada has bubble wrapped itself in terms of denying that it has forcibly disappeared children. And how did it do that? It did that by abstaining from references to cultural genocide and other forms of genocide in international law and Canadian law, refusing to sign certain conventions, and removing crucial references to specific acts of genocide from the Canadian legal definition of genocide. So she argues, the special interlocutor argues, that this was a deliberate alignment of international and Canadian law to protect itself from charges that could arise from the residential institution system. She says this amnesty is self-granted. The government gave itself amnesty. It's blanket, it covers everybody. It's unconditional. Nobody had to participate in any form of accountability, for example, such as perpetrators had to do in South Africa in their Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And it's de facto, it's just assumed. It's not ever announced, it's just assumed. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see that she has named obligations that Canada has to deal with this settler amnesty and culture of impunity. In terms of addressing it, Canada has to ratify the American Convention on Human Rights and accept the jurisdiction of the Inter-American Court on Human Rights, accept the International Convention for the Protection of All Persons from Enforced Disappearance, and codify it in Canadian law, and refer enforced disappearances to the International Criminal Court. Again, these are obligations that the United Church of Canada could choose to support through education and advocacy. Next slide. This, I think, was my third focal point, a commission of inquiry, and we'll explore it on the next slide. So the special interlocutor has said that in cases of enforced disappearance, international law requires investigation and reparation through an independent commission of inquiry. It can't be conducted by the state itself. And in this case, it should be Indigenous-led and would have powers under international law that both the TRC and the special interlocutor herself purposely weren't given. We look at the next slide. We will see that the obligation is, of course, to call for such a commission, and that it would be an independent Indigenous-led national commission. Now, the United Church of Canada, I think, could respond in two ways to this. Could support the call through its education and advocacy, and it could participate fully and transparently in the commission as required. The next point is settler denialism. See, now Brian just knows he has to advance the slide for me. He just hears me say the next point, and there it is. Settler denialism. The special interlocutor focuses significantly on settler denialism, which is an act that undermines the call for reconciliation and for justice. She highlights 5 common myths that are broadly shared by a relatively small number of highly influential people in media, education, business, politics, and in faith communities. And these myths, these common tropes of denialism, are that, oh, the harms of residential institutions have been overstated and the positives have been overlooked. The experiences at residential schools have been exaggerated. We don't really know the truth about the deaths at residential schools. And there's a conspiracy to exaggerate deaths for political and financial gain on the part of Indigenous communities. And the final one, it's not genocide. So these myths are repeated regularly in social media, in mainstream media, in community gatherings, and the relatively small number of people who do this have significant power to reach a lot of people. And the myths are often presented sort of as a curiosity. I can't believe that's true. You know, it's a questioning for clarification. I mentioned Sean Carlton earlier, and he says he characterizes it as a learned behavior. That when people feel implicated by the horrific evidence in front of them, they seek comfort in denying reality. Who wants to admit that this has happened in this country? And in fact, there was a speaker at the event. I forget his name now, but he's a former diplomat for Canada, and he said, and he runs an initiative, solidarity initiative with Indigenous peoples around this issue. And he said he was very clear about he's worked for Canada his entire life. He said, I love Canada, and it breaks my heart that when I realize what Canada has done, but I have to confront that. I have to confront the fact that it did it. It doesn't matter that my heart hurts. And he's a very powerful speaker. I'll try and find some more of his address. So what are the obligations around settler denialism? Next slide. she's proposed a number of legislative and legal steps that Canada can undertake to address denialism, including addressing it as hate speech and particularly targeting online media. There is actually a private member's bill to add residential institution denialism to the criminal code as hatred of Indigenous peoples. That's from the MP Leah Gazan. She can't move it forward anymore in this session, but she is interested in talking to the government about asking them to pick it up and carry it forward. That is certainly something that the United Church could get behind in terms of political advocacy. Next slide. This is really super, super detailed, but again, it shows you how she has thought through the obligations. She has a very detailed plan, including tracking, monitoring, enforcing penalties around residential school denialism. And she calls for support for the communities that are affected by this hate. It's not just about stopping the dissemination of hate. It's also about helping to stop the harm in community. Again, it does link back to some of what Joni was talking about in the range of programs that the Healing Fund offers. Now, how can the United Church respond to this? Well, we are a faith-based organization that says its goal is to be anti-racist, actively anti-racist. So I think the church has a contribution to make, not only in supporting the legislation, but also in everything we do as a community of communities of faith. Education, advocacy, faith reflection, how we talk about this on Sunday mornings, how we talk about it in events like this, and what we're willing to do to stand up for it. The next slide. This takes us to the 10 obligations in which the churches are specifically named or implicated. So I think, as you can tell, I think we're implicated in all the others, and we have something to contribute to them. But we should really, in particular, look at what we have been asked to do. So let's go to the next slide. So we have 2 obligations around the truth and reconciliation calls to action. And those concern calls to actions 71 to 76. Those are the calls to action that relate to unknown burial sites. So as I mentioned earlier, when I talked about bringing the children home, national and regional archive staff continue to do the work that we're called on here to identify and share all the information that the church holds on deaths, burials, and cemeteries related to United Church residential institutions, as well as hospitals and missions. So we need to continue to do that work if we're going to respond positively to this report. The next slide, please. This calls for continued funding for community-led investigations into missing and disappeared children, as well as commemoration. And this will definitely have implications for the United Church. I gave you a quick update on bringing the children home. There is no timeline to wrap that up, but this definitely has implications for the future of that program. The next one also has implications for bringing the children home. And there was an entire hearing that was about this question. Who should have access to, who should have ownership of all of the documentation that we have related to these children in residential institutions? And the special interlocutor calls for Indigenous peoples to have sovereignty over all the information that is held by them, about them, all the information about them that is held by Canada and by the churches and other institutions. This includes searching for all records, transferring them, and following certain human rights-based archival principles. It's really sounds boring, but in some cases, this is the only record we have of someone's life. And how do we honor that? How do we honor that record? So our regional and national archives have been proactively searching and digitizing all this information. As I mentioned, that wasn't previously identified by the TRC, and we are providing that to communities in digital form. And the archives reconciliation framework already follows the path that's laid out here, including the Joanne Orent-Leicher principles, which are principles related to the right to know the truth with respect to human rights abuses. But Archive says we have had that training, but we need to we have got new staff. We need to do more training on it. And they have also been trained in the First Nations principles of ownership, control, access, and provision, or OCAP. Now, one of the things you might have heard coming out of the Special Interlocutor's report, news coverage, if you heard anything, is her criticism of the churches for withholding records. And not all churches are the same. Not all Indigenous people are the same. I don't think this is, I think when she says the churches, she's expressing her frustration. She's expressing her frustration with somebody other than the United Church of Canada. In her report, she actually highlights the innovative work that our archives have done to proactively search out more records and share the records with the community. That's not to say we deserve a pat on the back. We still held all those documents for a long time. But I just want you to know that she has expressed appreciation for the way we have been doing that work. And I think would like to see us continuing to do that work, continuing to share that material with the people whom it concerns. So I think that's an important thing for you to note. And I think it's also important that those institutions that are not releasing their documents, I think it's important that they are pressured to do so. Let's take a look at the next slide. This obligation is about passing legislation to create a national records registry so that there would be a national registry where everyone's records are listed out and you know exactly where they are and exactly where you can go to get them. The United Church could obviously support that legislation and it could comply with it once it's passed. Let's just go to the next slide. Again, this is still on the right to truth legislation. One of the things that she calls for is creating an offense for destroying or altering records. This should be obvious that you don't do that. And it is, in fact, the United Church's archival principle is to preserve. That is clear. But we do need to seek some clarity on this one because we are currently, by Supreme Court decision in 2017 called Fontaine, we are currently legally obliged to destroy our copies of survivors' claims of more serious abuse, sexual, physical, psychological abuse through the alternative dispute resolution process or the independent assessment process. These are deeply, deeply personal and traumatic testimonies that when people gave them, they were not asked to consent for them to go to archives. So the legal decision is that they have to be destroyed. And that means that those of us who hold copies of them, once the files are closed, we have been ordered to destroy them. But now the special interlocutor is making this call. And so I think we just have to do this carefully. We have to do it. We have to do it the right way. Again, it all comes down to the fact that this is someone else's story, not ours. And so I think this is something that we will be trying to get more guidance on. And if we go to the next slide, you'll see that she's also saying we need a moratorium on destroying anything. And so that could also apply to these records. And again, we need to get more clarity on that. This is not to say we agree or disagree with this. It's about the reality is that we are in a certain legal space that we need to be clearer on. Okay, almost there now. Just a couple of more slides. The next one, return of records. I'm sure you've heard lots of stories about there's all kinds of records in the Vatican, or there's all kinds of records in the archives of the Church of England, and we need to get those. I think this is mostly directed to Roman Catholic and Anglican entities, but I think that the United Church needs to maybe take a look at Methodist records in England to see if is there anything there that relates to the Methodist missions pre-1925. So we need to take a look at that. And the final, not the final slide, but the final obligation is the next one. Apology and action as reparation. Again, this is probably not a surprise. We are being told that, you know, the apology that you did in 1986, the apology that you did in 1998, those were steps, but they are not the substantive, detailed apologies for the level of harm that you've caused, and you do need to revise or reissue more meaningful apologies. We already have a couple of requests for this in front of us that we are trying to work through, and that is certainly a priority for the United Church in light of the what became clear in 2021, where we need to go in terms of an apology. Also outstanding is the fact that the 1986 apology, that still hasn't been accepted. And it hasn't been accepted because people need to know that we're truly living into it. So all of this work around the apologies, I think, will be a big one for the church moving forward, as well as, you know, the larger question of reparative justice. One more slide. So this is the logo of the special interlocutor, and I think it's a beautiful representation of a mother and a child, and you sort of see the negative space of the small bear, and you know what that means. That child is gone. So I reflect back on my experience a week and a half ago, and I think back to the opening session where an elder said, right at the beginning, every one of you in this room has the story of a child that didn't come home. And I suspect strongly that the elder didn't have a church or a government representative in mind when he said that. But I couldn't help but think at the time that it applied to me as well as those that he intended, although in a different way. And that just kind of sat with me in the morning. And then it went to this very powerful presentation of the report and other sessions. And I recognized that it is true. As the representative of the non-Indigenous United Church of Canada, I do in fact hold stories of children who didn't come home. They're not my children. I don't know those children, but I hold their stories because I hold the institutional history. And consequently, that we do have as a church, sacred obligations to those children. And I think it's very appropriate that the special interlocutor named these as sacred obligations. Her report builds significantly on what the TRC brought forward into non-Indigenous people's consciousness. It offers a clear and concrete path towards justice. I believe, though, that it's going to be an uphill battle with the government and with settler Canada, but I believe it's a hill we need to climb as church and as society. Much as the late Honorable Murray Sinclair indicated 9 years ago, almost 9 years ago, when he released the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we have described for you a mountain. We have shown you the path to the top, and we call on you to do the climbing. So here's more of the path to the top and the climbing. So I'll end it there, and thank you for your attention and time.
Thank you to Joni and Sara for your sharing and for your very profound presentations. Now is a time for questions and answers. If people have questions, they're invited to send them by email. So Sara and Joni, there is a question for you, if you're both able to respond. I'll pose a question and then just leave a bit of time for pause for you both to reflect, and also for everyone just to reflect on all that Sara has shared. That was a lot of profound information. So I'll pose a question. You can pause and then you're welcome to respond as you would like. So given all that has been shared this evening around the Healing Fund, around the Indigenous-Led framework, what are some very practical ways that people in local communities of faith can respond to what has been shared and presented this evening? Over to you.
Well, as the in terms of the Healing Fund and the inside the Healing Fund, I must say that there are other grants that are available for Indigenous post-secondary school students and Indigenous ministers. And to the Indigenous Church. So there's also the Dorothy Jenkins Fund, the Alvin Dixon Fund, and the Wasiabin Indigenous Bursary for post-secondary school students. So aside from, so there's the four grants in general, and then the support to the UCW project. What you could do in your local communities of faith is share the information of the Healing Fund. If you have Indigenous community members that access your community, you could share the grant information with them as well. But you also, if there's that opportunity in collections, where your community of faith could make a gift to the Healing Fund, and it could go to either one of the post-secondaries, or you could specify it to the UCW, to a UCW initiative. That's how you could just share the word, spread the word of the Healing Fund, and that it's intended to support Indigenous peoples and communities in the healing, from the impacts of residential school. So it's restoring languages and cultural programs in communities. Miigwech.
Yeah, I think that that's always an important contribution to make. I think in light of the special interlocutors report, I think and in light of the way we see discourse happening in this country, I think it's really important for people to stand up and speak the truth. So if you hear someone saying, I don't really believe those children are buried there, or I don't really believe it was that bad at residential institutions, challenge them. Say, no, we have this evidence. We have the testimony of people who attended. We have these two major investigations now that tell you this truth. It is the truth. So really push back at those curious questions, or the just for clarification questions, because they are a form of denialism. So I think that that's a really important thing for people to do. I think it's really important for those of us who are settlers to know our history, Adele and I have been involved in a project about just that, about researching our family histories to see our place in colonialism so that we can understand the role that we played. It's not just that anonymous people came here and did terrible things to Indigenous people. Those were our relatives, and we have continued um, to benefit from them. I mean, Adele and I in very different ways. I'm pure English settler background. Adele comes through a different context of the history of enslavement. So it's a different story, but we still both benefit from that. So to actually understand that and just own it for what it is, I think being honest with ourselves and being honest with our friends is a really, really important thing that we need to do. If that bill around hate crime goes forward, mobilize to get people in favor of it. Talk to your MPs, get that bill passed. Learn more about reparative justice or reparations. We're going to be doing more work on that in the United Church. Take part in that work when we offer study sessions, when we offer action opportunities. So I think those are sort of three big things that you could think about doing, as well as supporting the work that Joni has described.
Excellent. Thank you both, Joni and Sara, for sharing these words for concrete action. Sara, a question has just come in for you. I'm wondering if you might be able to respond to this one.
Okay.
So the question is, the additional records that the special interlocutor has asked to be turned or returned, is she envisioning that they would become part of the records at the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, or is another place planned?
I think both. Everything that we uncover, we send to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. So it started with all of our records that were scanned by the.
Sorry, Sara, you became muted. Yes. We think you're back now. Yep, you're back now. Welcome back.
No.
It's breaking up.
Hear me now?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you now.
Something wrong with my headset. Everything that we sent to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, we sent to the National Center for Truth and Reconciliation. Everything that we have found since in a new, broader search also goes to the NCTR. So, but the NCTR does have privacy issues because it's housed within a university. It has some issues about how it can share material because of privacy law. And so it can be very difficult for people to find the records from the NCTR. So while I think she wants those records there, she also wants them accessible in other ways. And so that's why she wants this national registry, so that you're not dependent on having to go to the NCTR, which is encumbered by federal legislation. You can just go to this other thing and say, oh, the United Church has all these records. I'll just go there and get them because we're not encumbered by them. We can share them. So I think she wants probably both. But I think she has expressed concern about some church parties saying, oh, all our records at the NCTR, you can just go there and find them. We know that doesn't work for people because of the privacy legislation that encumbers that institution. So they're trying to fix that very, very hard because they are the survivors' archives, right? But we need to do both is the answer.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Sara. And now a question for both of you. So in addition to what you have already shared this evening, what else might you offer as either encouragement or challenge to people who are here? And this may maybe these are some of your closing words to everyone here.
Well, I myself like to encourage everyone to attend any kind of Indigenous events happening in your area. You know, attend your local friendship center. Attend a day, maybe if there's an Indigenous health center there, you know, learn about, you know, you might want to, you know, you might learn a little bit about the medicines and how there's that connection to the land. You know, a lot of like aside from sun dances and like, you know, the ceremonies, some of those are private, you know, invitational. But powwows, art markets, fashion shows, you know, all of those show the culture, you know. Some of them, you know, do fashion out of deer hides and porcupine quills, and you know, my mom makes porcupine quill earrings and jewelry. You know, it went from the traditional art of quill boxes, but my mom, we say she modernized the art of quill work, and she's bringing it more into more fashionable dangly earrings and necklaces and bracelets and rings, and she does excellent work, by the way. But yeah, you know, take advantage and take a look at all those craft work. You know, maybe sit in at a beading shop, or you know, learn the importance of a ribbon shirt, a ribbon skirt. You know, you're not gonna, if you're gonna go to a sharing circle, or you're gonna go to an event, or there's some kind of, you know, residential school thing, chances are you're not gonna hear those heartfelt, really deep stories. You're gonna hear little things here and there, but you're going to see how the connection between elders and youth, the connection between people, you're going to hear a little bit language probably spoken, you know, because it's really hard. Like I myself is not a fluent speaker. I'm going to try my best when I do the closing prayer in a little bit. Um, but you know, you'll hear a little bit of that. You know, the laughter is healing. You know, you'll hear a lot of laughter in places, the art, the vibrancy, you know. It is heavy work, but we're resilient, we're strong, and you know, a lot of that shows, you know, when you hear people talk, when you hear the laughter, when you see the artwork, when you see what's being expressed in the paintings, or what's being, you know, you learn about the richness of a quill box, you know, what the connection is there between the hard work of harvesting porcupine quills, harvesting birch bark, you know, learning how to work with such delicate material. You know, it's all in there, and the stories shared through those makings of craft work. You know, I have lots of stories from my sharing from my grandma and my grand and my great grandparents. But the other thing I wanted to make mention too is when you see people struggling like their mental health issues or addictions, understand that is the intergenerational trauma. You know, my parents were what would you say, weren't able to speak about how they feel. My parents weren't able to, you know, be children, you know, probably because their parents couldn't do it, right? So grandma and grandpa went to residential school. They were told to not do certain things and how to live and do things. Well, you know, that didn't give the chance for my parents to, you know, to learn the things they need to learn to um make sure I have, you know, I don't know how if I'm saying it right, but just know those traumas, those addictions, the mental health, you know, those are intergenerational effects, you know, because like I said, our parents didn't have the chance to um have those supports that there is today, you know. You know, if I recall, my mom, you know, she expressed that she didn't have the opportunity to share things that she went through as a child because of her parents and then their grandparents. So, you know, it's just, um, having that openness. You know, it's not just because they're just a bunch of people drinking bottles and, you know, or they're just going crazy or whatever. You know, it's not that. There's deeper trauma inside of them that is hard for them to deal with, because that's what we were taught to do, is not to share of how we feel. So just understand that mental health is just beyond. That's the intergenerational effects from the residential school. My gosh.
Yeah, yeah, what she said.
Friends, thank you for this very profound sharing this evening. There's much to think about and to reflect on. We are going to move in a moment to close in prayer. Joni is going to lead us in a closing prayer. As we move to close, I'll offer my thanks to Sara and Joni once again for all that they have shared this evening. I've put into the chat a link to a survey if you would like to fill that. It's a very short 2-minute survey that you can fill in at your leisure if you take that link away. So just deep, profound thanks. An invitation back to Joni to lead us in prayer, to close us, ground us as we continue on with our lives beyond. Thank you, Joni.
All right, you guys. When I was asked to do a closing prayer, I like practicing this one because, you know, as I mentioned earlier, I'm not fluent in my language, but I try my best, and this is one of the things that I like practicing with, because it's repetition, right? Like A, B, C, D, E, F, G. You know, you repeat the ABC so many times, you eventually get the hang of it, right? So this is my closing prayer. I will say it in the Anishinaabe first, and I'll translate what I just said right after each other. But yes, Miigwech Gujamanado. Thank you, Creator. Kinage go gaji toin for all that you have created. Miigwech Mishomis Jesus. Thank you, Grandfather Son. Gibiwe Jayen Nangum for shining on us today. Miigwech Nokomis Debik Jesus. Thank you, Grandmother Sun, Grandmother Moon. Gibiwe Jayen Debikuk for shining on us at night. Miigwech Shkakamekwe Gimi's Young. Thank you, Mother Earth, for giving us Bamatsuan life, for giving Gimi's Young Medium, for giving us food. Gimi's Young Nibish, for giving us water. Gimi's Young Wesenyak, for giving us animals. Meanwhile, Gimi's Young Nesewin, for giving us breath. Saman Nabaganana, Gewednang, Wabanang, I offer tobacco to the north and the east. Shawana, meanwhile, Epnikishmak, to the south and to the west. Nadomoshin Jomoshkabaya, Minwa Jojo Deeya. Help me to stand strong and to have a strong heart. Miigwech Kujamadado. Thank you, Creator. Thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening. We hope you enjoyed our presentation, and we'll say Bomampi. Miigwech.